Okay, let's dive deep. Welcome back. Today, we're carrying on with our exploration of a really profound framework. It's designed to guide us out of that constant feeling, that pressure of survival, and more into a state of, well, real inner freedom. It's the pathway to sovereignty. And our focus today is really drawing from a powerful piece written by Helen Mudiba called When Being Strong Became the Only Option. And that title, I think it immediately grabs you, doesn't it? It captures that core tension we're looking at, something so many people experience, particularly women. It's that really painful point,
Yeah.
where the strength that once felt like your protection, the thing that let you navigate really difficult systems, suddenly starts to cost you something you can't replace. Your peace, your presence, just your ability to rest.
It really is a universally felt tension, and the way Helen Madiba puts it is just so clear. The whole premise, really, is that women were often, conditioned or taught to be strong, to be incredibly resilient, to shoulder these huge responsibilities long before they were ever really taught what safety felt like, or guaranteed it even.
Right.
They were sort of handed the script, hold it all together, anticipate what everyone else needs, work twice as hard, maybe 3 times as hard, just to be seen as half as worthy.
Mm-hmm.
And in that kind of environment, strength stops being just, a virtue. It becomes mandatory. It becomes the main language of survival.
Yeah.
It's like a declaration saying, look, I am capable. I belong here, and you will not break me.
That feels like such an important distinction to make. This wasn't necessarily a choice, this strength. It was, well, it was a brilliant adaptation. Wasn't it?
Absolutely. A necessary one.
But the article suggests that over time, that same adaptation can start to feel restrictive. It becomes like armor that's actually heavier than whatever threat it was built for in the first place. It turns into this sort of mask of success, hiding the internal reality, the exhaustion, the collapse, the deep lack of safety that the body is screaming about.
Precisely. And the work of sovereignty, this pathway, is about recognizing that shift when the adaptation stops serving you. And to help guide that shift, we use the Pathway to Sovereignty framework. It's really a way of remembering that inner freedom that gets lost after long periods of living in, hypervigilance or just constant survival mode.
Could you just walk us through those 6 levels again and maybe stress the non-linear part? Because I think that's really key for people to grasp. It's not like climbing a ladder.
Certainly. And yes, nonlinear is crucial. The pathway maps out 6 territories. And we really do stress the word territories rather than stages because they're places you inhabit, places you might revisit many times. They are survival, then stability, then self-awareness, moving into integrity, then wholeness, and finally freedom. And the nonlinear aspect means, for example, you might feel a real sense of freedom in, say, your work life, feeling confident and aligned. But then maybe your relationship challenge comes up and suddenly your nervous system feels like it's right back in survival mode.
Right, starting over in that area.
Exactly. You need to rebuild that sense of safety from the ground up in that specific context. The beauty of this framework, I think, is that it doesn't dismiss the power that was needed, the strength that got you through. Instead, it helps redefine the source of your power. So we move away from strength as just pushing harder against the tide, striving, enduring, forcing things. Towards finding strength in a much deeper alignment, in being receptive, in honoring the radical truth of your own actual experience. It's maybe the difference between bracing yourself for a punch versus learning how to move with the wave.
And the way we make that shift, that fundamental change, is what the article calls the unlearning curve, which I love. Because we're not just, adding new habits on top. We're actively releasing years, maybe decades of these reflexive patterns that got wired really deep into our nervous systems because, well, they kept us safe once.
That's exactly right. The piece is very specific about these core reflexes that define survival for so many. It names pleasing others, proving your worth, perfecting everything, performing constantly, and protecting yourself fiercely.
Right.
The whole journey, the unlearning curve, is about slowly, and it does take courage, releasing those first 5 reflexes in favor of the 6th one, which sounds simple, but isn't. It's just allowing.
Allowing. Yeah, it sounds so deceptively simple, doesn't it? But I imagine it's actually the hardest step because it means letting go of control. If I stop proving myself all the time, if I stop performing what fills that space, that must feel incredibly vulnerable, maybe even terrifying.
It really is the ultimate act of trust, isn't it? The inner voice, the survival brain is screaming. If you stop controlling things, if you stop working so hard or making everyone happy, it's all going to fall apart. The allowing phase is that moment you finally recognize that the intelligence that built that armor, the proving, the performing it was brilliant. It kept you safe. But now, that armor had become a kind of self-imposed cage. And our deep dive today, looking at the stories of these three women, is really about witnessing what happens when they finally start to allow that armor to gently drop.
Okay. Let's move into our opening activity then. We want to start by just priming the nervous system a bit for this reflection, inviting not just the mind to understand, but the body, the emotions to resonate. We want to invite you just for a moment to consider this. Imagine a man writing to a woman, not to defend himself, not to explain away his actions, not to intellectualize her experience, but simply, finally, to say, I see what it cost you to survive me.
That image, it's potent, isn't it? Because it names that pattern of invisible labor, of emotional exhaustion that so many women have carried, often silently, for decades. It suggests a different kind of world, a world where the burden of proof, the sheer exhaustion of constantly needing to be enough, is finally seen, acknowledged by the other side.
So, as you just hold that idea for a moment, this idea of deep, unearned acknowledgement would invite you to notice what stirs in your body. If you actually heard those words spoken to you genuinely, what would your immediate physical response be? Is it maybe a sudden rush of relief, like tension just dissolving that you didn't even know you were holding? Or is it perhaps a sharper feeling, an ache maybe? Old grief finally feeling safe enough to surface? Or perhaps it's just simple, stunned disbelief that such a genuine, unforced recognition could actually happen. Now, we're going to listen to a short reading of the letter that's referenced in the article. It's called, "To a Woman I Tried to Keep Small." Just stay present with whatever sensations arise in your body as you listen.
A letter for you. I can see how my presence lives in you still. The way you second-guess yourself before speaking, even when your truth is clear. The way you search faces for signs of approval, as if your worth could be granted or withdrawn in a glance. The way you sometimes apologize for taking up space, even when the space is yours by right. I know how this has followed you home. In the moments when you wanted tenderness, but instead you felt the echo of criticism and pulled back. In the times when your softness longed to rest in another's arms, but you held yourself instead, afraid your tears would be turned against you, even in joy. I suspect there are moments when you hesitate, checking whether your laughter will be too loud, your excitement too much, your presence too overwhelming. I know how it shadows you at work. You hold back ideas that could transform the room because you have felt what happens when your clarity unsettles those who fear it. You let others take credit or step forward first because you remember what it feels like to be labeled arrogant or controlling when all you carried was vision. Even when you succeed, a quiet voice whispers that you must soften the edges so no one feels threatened. And I know how it reaches into relationships where trust should be a ground to grow. It sometimes feels like a test to endure. You measure yourself against old accusations. Too strong, too sensitive, too ambitious, too emotional. And when you are met with misunderstanding, you wonder not whether the other person is unready, but whether you should once again fold yourself smaller to fit. I see now that I am one of the voices that planted this pattern in you. I was not the first, but I carried it forward. I had learned it long before us. That a woman's clarity was arrogance, her softness weakness, her power danger. I carried those unspoken lessons, and when I met them in you, I could not hold them with grace. At first I told myself I was protecting balance, that I was guiding, that I was steadying you. But beneath those claims was fear. Each time your clarity shone, it exposed the places in me that felt uncertain. Each time your softness opened, it revealed how little I had let myself feel. Each time your power rose, it threatened the ground I thought I needed to stand on. So I tried to contain you, I corrected, I diminished, I dismissed. Sometimes sharply, sometimes in subtle ways. A glance, a silence, a shift in tone that made you question yourself. It was not only the words I said, but the weight behind them, a weight that told you again and again, be less. What I see now, if I let myself look deeper, is that I was not only silencing you, I was silencing myself. The parts of me I had exiled, tenderness, vulnerability, intuition. I projected onto you and then punished you for showing. I made you carry what I could not face in me. And because of that, I left you with a wound that was not yours to bear. I cannot pretend this did not shape you. The hesitation you feel in rooms, the caution you carry in love, the shadow of self-doubt that sits beside your brightest qualities. Those are the echoes of my fear, and it is not fair that you were asked to carry them. If I had the courage to give back what I took, this is what I would return to you. Your clarity unshadowed by my insecurity. Let it be recognized as wisdom, not arrogance. Your softness honored as strength, not diminished as weakness. Your power seen as life itself moving through you, not danger to be managed. Your wholeness allowed to exist without contradiction, without correction, without apology. I would hand back to you the right to trust your own voice, without waiting for approval. The right to take up space, not in fragments, but in fullness. The right to laugh loudly, cry deeply, speak bravely, rest tenderly. And if I could bless the ground beneath you now, it would be with this. May you never again shrink to fit the fears of another. May you know with each step that your very being carries balance, that you are never too much and never not enough, but whole as you are. I see now that what played out between us was not only personal, it was part of a wider story written into the bones of our culture, where women have been told for centuries that their softness is weakness, their strength a threat, their passion disorder, their silence virtue. I carried that story without questioning it, and I passed it on. You bore its weight when you should never have been asked to. May you be free of it. May you write a truer story with your life, one where the fullness of who you are is not trimmed or tamed, but welcomed as necessary. If my voice once told you to shrink, may this voice, even if late, remind you that the world is wider when you do not. From the one who mistook your fullness for a threat and sees now too late the gift it always was.
So, what stirs in you when survival no longer feels like proof of strength? That really is the question sitting right at the heart of this work, isn't it? For so long, the exhaustion itself, the striving, the constant enduring, that was the proof, that was the badge of honor. Look how much I can handle. The significance of hearing that kind of acknowledgement, even just imagining it, is that it finally offers some external validation, some accountability maybe, for the systemic patterns that led to that exhaustion in the first place. You see, when a woman has to carry that burden of proof all by herself, she can really only collapse inward. She starts mistaking her fatigue for some kind of personal failure. I'm not strong enough. I can't cope.
Right. It must be me.
Exactly. But when the pattern is named externally, it shifts. It transforms from feeling like a character flaw into recognizing it as a shared systemic experience. And that provides the space needed for healing, for release, space that was just impossible to find when you're too busy performing strength just to get through the day. That external recognition, even hearing it described like this, can often be the very beginning of the unlearning curve.
That reframing, moving from "it's my personal failure" to "this is a systemic experience that feels absolutely key." It's the moment the nervous system can finally maybe start to relax its grip just a little. Okay, so let's see how this unlearning curve actually shows up in the lives of the women profiled in the article. Let's start with Elara. So Elara is described as a high-achieving tech founder based in Berlin. Her entire world seems built on productivity. And her core survival mechanism, performance. She fundamentally equated being visible with being worthy. Output equaled legitimacy.
Yes. Her story is tragically relatable, I think, in today's professional world. She built this successful, venture-backed company from nothing, which obviously demands constant motion, constant energy. But the article points out that her success felt less like this satisfying accomplishment and more like, well, like running on a treadmill that's just set way too fast, an unsustainable speed.
Right.
Her initial state was just the sprint. Constant sprinting. We could immediately see her operating from the survival level. For Elara, busyness wasn't just a habit, it was her sanctuary. She was producing, she felt safe. If she was achieving, those inner critical voices went quiet for a bit. She didn't internalize that belief that so many women encounter. You have to work twice as hard to maybe be seen as half as good. And the underlying fear was stark. If I slow down, if I stop producing, do I even matter? Will I disappear? Stillness felt like erasure, like a catastrophic threat to her identity, her business, everything.
And this relentless pace, this constant performance, then masked itself as a kind of false stability. She had all the external markers, didn't she? The credibility, the team, the funding, the success. But internally, she was completely bankrupt, running on empty. And she justified the exhaustion as dedication. You know, buying into that mantra, successful people just push through.
Exactly. It was like a house built on sand. That stability was a total mirage because it depended entirely on continuous forced running. There was no internal enough point. Every milestone she hit just seemed to validate the need to immediately chase the next one. Her worthiness was always conditional, always dependent on her next output. She'd become brilliant at masking the fear that was actually driving the whole operation.
And then the catalyst, the moment the body just said, no more. It was pretty dramatic. It happened during a really high-stakes funding pitch. She was perfectly prepared, knew her lines inside out, delivering them flawlessly. But halfway through, her body just refused. It refused to cooperate. Her chest tightened up, her breath got really shallow, and boom, a full-blown panic attack right there in the meeting.
The body simply refused to lie anymore. And that physical refusal, that dramatic stop, was her breakthrough into self-awareness. She realized in that moment that her breath was the very first thing she sacrificed whenever she felt under pressure. When she was performing, she essentially abandoned her own body to focus only on the external delivery, on getting it right. That tightness in her chest, that low-level anxiety she'd lived with for so long and had maybe mistaken for drive or motivation. She suddenly saw it for what it was. It was her body screaming that this level of performance just couldn't continue.
And the insight that followed was huge. What she'd always labeled as ambition was often just raw fear dressed up in professional language. Her driving question shifted, didn't it? From that relentless, outward-looking, how can I do more, to a much more grounded, yet probably terrifying internal question, what exactly am I running from?
And moving from that awareness into actual action, that required enormous courage. That led her into the territory of integrity, which for her meant actively starting to separate her core identity from her achievements. This is huge for high performers. She had to learn to sit with that deep, visceral fear that got triggered whenever she tried to slow down. The fear of failure, the fear of becoming irrelevant.
Okay, so what did that actually look like for her day to day in that demanding tech environment? Because it's easy to say, stop working so hard, but doing it, that's the real challenge.
Oh, it was excruciatingly difficult for her, according to the piece. Integrity meant doing things like canceling those back-to-back meetings that didn't have a clear purpose, the ones that were really just about signaling, I'm busy, therefore I'm important. It meant practicing delegation, actually trusting her team with tasks she felt only she could do perfectly. That was a big one. And crucially, it meant setting real boundaries, saying no to things, even high-profile events that felt like essential marketing, because she needed to prioritize maybe just 1 hour of actual non-negotiable rest. The fear was loud, screaming at her that she was failing, but the practice of integrity was quieter, more consistent. She started working with somatic therapists, breathwork coaches, learning to honor her body's natural energy cycles instead of constantly forcing output.
And from creating that intentional space, that's where wholeness started to emerge. The article notes she discovered something interesting. Her creativity didn't actually come from pushing harder. It came when she allowed her nervous system to settle down. She started taking long walks, leaving her phone behind, sitting in stillness without that constant nagging guilt about being unproductive.
Exactly. And it was in those non-purposeful moments that the best insights came. The strategic leaps forward that years of just forcing output had never actually delivered. Rest became non-negotiable, not because she was just tired anymore, but because she realized it was reclaiming her aliveness, the part of her buried under all the performance. She realized her best self wasn't her most productive self, it was her most present self.
And ultimately, that led her to freedom. She began leading differently, leading through presence, through empathy, rather than that constant sense of urgency that had defined her company's culture for years. Her own regulated nervous system started to set the tone for the whole team.
That's it. She saw valorizing overwork. She started actually celebrating people's capacity to show up as fully human, not just fully productive robots. And she discovered that by modeling rest as strategic, not as some kind of indulgence, her team's efficiency actually improved. And maybe more importantly, their trust in her deepened significantly.
She found she could be soft sometimes, admit she was uncertain, say, I don't actually know the answer right now, and her team didn't lose respect for her.
Quite the opposite. They trusted her more because she was real. Finally, not some flawless performing machine. Her journey really leaves us with that fundamental question to reflect on. Where have you mistaken efficiency for proof that you matter?
That leads us beautifully into our second case study. We're moving from that high-octane performance world of tech to a different kind of mask, perhaps softer on the outside, but just as corrosive internally. This is Naomi, a social worker based in Cape Town.
Yes, Naomi's exhaustion wore the mask of sort of perpetual compassion. While Elara sought approval through her performance, Naomi sought belonging and love through pleasing others, through constant caregiving. She was known, celebrated even, in her community and family for having infinite patience, for always being able to hold space for everyone else's problems.
But the reality described is that she was just collapsing inward, under the sheer weight of all that holding. She'd perfected the art of invisible labor, hadn't she? Anticipating every need before it was spoken, smoothing out conflicts before they even started, just giving and giving until her own well was completely dry.
Her survival level was really defined by this core belief that love had to be earned through caregiving. She learned very early on that the safest way to ensure she was valued, maybe even indispensable, was to make her own needs secondary, or just entirely irrelevant compared to the needs of others around her.
It sounds like a defensive adaptation again.
It absolutely was. If she was indispensable as the caretaker, the peacemaker, then maybe she wouldn't be abandoned or overlooked. It felt safer to be needed.
And this deep need to be the essential caregiver then created this profound sense of false stability. She was convinced she was the one keeping everything balanced, holding it all together, but she was just running on fumes. And guilt became her constant companion whenever she even thought about resting. Rest felt fundamentally selfish, didn't it? Or worse, like she was abandoning her duties, letting people down.
Yes, that kind of stability is so often characterized by just chronic depletion. She measured her worth by how much she could endure, how many needs she could meet before collapsing. And the insidious thing about this pattern is that the constant striving means you can never truly acknowledge the depth of your own fatigue, because admitting you're tired would mean questioning your entire system of value, your whole identity.
So what was the catalyst for Naomi? It wasn't a dramatic boardroom moment like Elara's. It came quietly, at home, an invitation, really, from the person she loved most, her teenage daughter. Apparently, during a quiet moment, her daughter just looked at her and observed, very simply, "Mom, you look like you love everyone except you."
That's a truth bomb, isn't it? Delivered with the kind of clarity only pure love can manage.
Definitely.
And that observation, it just landed with absolute, undeniable truth. Her daughter's words became the doorway for her into self-awareness. She started to really notice, maybe for the first time, the profound aching loneliness that was hidden underneath all the exhaustion, all the busyness of caring for others. She was always giving, always connecting outwards, but she was never truly deeply being held in return.
And the revelation that followed that must have been terrifying, realizing that her tireless caregiving wasn't just generosity, it was actually a profound defense mechanism, a strategy to control connection, to make sure she was needed so she wouldn't be left alone. The difficult, quiet truth she finally had to admit to herself was, I actually don't know how to receive. I don't know how to let people love me unless I feel like I've earned it first.
And that raw recognition set the stage for the really hard work of integrity. For Naomi, integrity meant practicing saying no. That tiny word felt like a catastrophic failure of her core identity as the caregiver. She had to learn to say it without launching into long, elaborate justifications, without apologizing profusely or feeling consumed by guilt. Just no, as a complete sovereign sentence, honoring her own very real, very limited capacity.
I can only imagine the internal noise around that. Her entire system must have been screaming at her. If you stop being useful, you'll stop being loved. People will reject you.
Oh, that fear was absolutely real for her. But the fascinating thing was, the external reality turned out to be profoundly different. She discovered that most people in her life, her family, her clients, her colleagues, they actually respected her boundaries when she stated them clearly. Yes, they stepped up. They started taking responsibility for their own needs, which in itself was a vital part of their own growth and maturity. So she didn't lose connection. She gained space. And she gained trust. The boundary didn't push people away like she feared. It actually deepened her relationships because they started to become reciprocal instead of purely transactional.
That's amazing. So moving into wholeness, what did that look like? She started reclaiming joy, didn't she? Through something completely non-purposeful, she turned to clay work, making little sculptures that had no deadline, no function, no expected outcome.
Exactly. Just pure pleasure. Feeling the earth, shaping something just for the sake of it. It was a direct antidote to years of being in perpetual service mode. This allowed her to reconnect with her own aliveness, her own humanity, completely separate from her functional roles as mother or social worker. She also apparently used inner child dialogue work, really consciously working to dismantle that foundational belief that love was conditional on her giving. She had to teach her younger self again and again that her value was inherent, tied purely to her existence, not to her output or her seemingly endless capacity for self-sacrifice.
Her ultimate freedom, then, was learning to actually receive care, without feeling that immediate, frantic need to reciprocate or somehow pay it back.
Yes. Learning to simply trust that she was lovable just because she existed. Full stop. She started getting better at noticing the quiet, non-transactional ways people already loved her. You know, the friend who brings over dinner without being asked, the lingering hug from her daughter, just sitting in comfortable silence with someone. She learned to allow those moments in without immediately deflecting or minimizing them or feeling obligated.
So for those listening who might resonate with Naomi's story, the reflection here is a powerful one. What happens when you stop holding everything together?
Okay, our final case study takes us to Zahra. She's a global consultant working in Geneva, and her approach to survival involved that third reflex we mentioned, proving. And she achieved this through radical emotional control. She fundamentally confused keeping composure with having credibility. She sought respect by over-intellectualizing every single feeling she had. Yes, Zahra operated in a world that was often high stakes, definitely hierarchical, and frequently quite hostile to overt displays of emotion, especially from women. So her strategy was built on that premise. Emotional control equals respect. Her feelings were always filtered, always edited, always performed for maximum palatability, so she wouldn't upset the status quo. She learned to analyze her hurt, rationalize her anger, strategize her fear, rather than actually feeling any of it directly.
Which places her squarely in the survival level again. She learned to mimic the communication patterns she saw in authority figures around her, suppressing her intuition, valuing logic above all else, because she observed that vulnerability, especially her vulnerability, was often punished or somehow weaponized against her in that environment.
This kind of self-translation, it was a necessary tool for her to navigate that system. But as the article highlights, it came at a really terrible cost. Over time, she started to lose fluency in her own authentic voice. She almost forgot what it sounded like. And that rigidity came to define her stability phase. She became so incredibly expert at compartmentalizing her professional self over here, her human self locked away somewhere else, that she genuinely forgot she was performing half the time. That extreme control made her feel comfortable, safe even, and certainly respected. But underneath it, she masked a profound loneliness, the inevitable consequence of never allowing herself to be fully, truthfully seen by anyone.
Her catalyst for change wasn't a panic attack like Elara's, or a comment from a loved one like Naomi's. It was the sharp pain of her own complicity. It happened in a high-level meeting. She stayed silent when a female colleague, someone she respected, had her idea subtly but quite clearly dismissed by the senior male leadership in the room.
And the intellectual part of Zahra, the strategist, immediately rationalized her silence. She told herself, speaking up now would make me look emotional. or it would make me look partisan, taking sides. I'll lose my strategic credibility if I rock the boat. She confused neutrality with wisdom.
But after the moment passed, the shame that washed over her was intense. It burned in her chest like a physical heat. And that visceral reaction, the shame of realizing she'd confused neutrality with complicity, that became her entry point into self-awareness. She started to see the immense, continuous cost of always striving to be appropriate.
She realized that restraint wasn't always wisdom. Often it was just fear. Fear of being labeled difficult. Fear of being seen as too emotional. Fear of social or professional rejection if she didn't conform. The internal questions started bubbling up. What would it actually feel like to speak without editing every word? What if I let my voice shake? She began questioning the comfort she'd found in constantly censoring her own truth.
So, integrity for Zahra demanded something truly terrifying. The act of speaking her truth even while she was trembling. She had to go back, address the incident, advocate not just for her colleague, but for the kind of respectful culture she actually believed in, even if it wasn't the current reality.
And that first act of real conviction was terrifying for her. Apparently her hands shook, her voice wavered. She felt completely exposed. But this is the pivot point. The article notes that the room fell silent, but not in judgment, as she'd feared. They fell silent in attention. They were listening. She found, maybe to her own surprise, that her trembling voice actually carried far more weight, far more integrity than her usual highly polished, controlled composure ever had. She realized her previous silence hadn't protected her authority at all. It had actually diminished it.
Wow. That's a phenomenal insight, isn't it? That showing your vulnerability, showing your fear even, can actually amplify your truth, not detract from it.
It connects you to your full humanity, which people respond to. So in Wholeness, Zahra turned to writing. But intentionally not writing reports or structured strategic documents. She started writing personal essays, reflections on emotional intelligence, on the hidden cost of all that composure. Writing became a form of embodying her voice, a way to move the feelings through her body and onto the page, untranslated.
She also worked with a voice coach, didn't she, to consciously find her full emotional range again, moving beyond that very modulated, almost monotone boardroom voice that had become her shield. Practicing letting her voice have texture, letting it swell and soften, embodying all the notes she'd suppressed for so long.
Her ultimate freedom was found in leading through congruence, not conformity. She stopped performing authority and started actually embodying it from the inside out. She brought her full, flawed human self into the room, acknowledging uncertainty, naming complex emotions where appropriate, asking difficult questions without always needing to have the perfect answer ready.
And just like with Elara, this actually made her a more effective leader, didn't it? People trusted her more, not because she was flawless, but precisely because she was real.
Exactly. And by leading with that congruence, she created the space, the permission, really, for others around her to bring their full humanity to the table, too. It shifted the whole dynamic.
So for Zahra, and for anyone who relates to that pattern of proving through control, the final reflection is stark. Where have you mistaken restraint for wisdom? So looking across these three incredible yet very different journeys, Elara, the performer, Naomi, the pleaser, and Zahra, the prover, we see three unique survival reflexes being unlearned. But there's a singular shared pathway emerging towards inner freedom.
Absolutely. They all started from a place where their sense of safety, their sanctuary, was built on some form of rigid control, whether it was controlling output, controlling caregiving, or controlling emotion. And their shared discovery, the painful truth they all bumped up against, was that this very sanctuary eventually started to suffocate their authenticity. The armor they built for external protection had, over time, become an internal cage.
And the key to unlocking that cage, it seems, was universally the body itself. That tightness Elara felt in her chest, the profound exhaustion Naomi couldn't hide anymore, the burning shame Zahra experienced. These weren't signs of weakness, were they?
Not at all.
Yeah.
They were powerful signals of profound wisdom arising from the body screaming, this isn't aligned, this isn't actually safe, this isn't sustainable. Choose differently. The Pathway to Sovereignty framework gave them the language, the map to understand these signals. But the actual gritty work of change was done in the body, learning to listen deeply and then choosing a different path, one of greater allowance, greater presence, greater truth.
And the article is really clear, as you said earlier, this unlearning curve isn't linear. It's not like they fixed themselves and then just walked off into the sunset perfectly healed. Elara probably still feels the pull of productivity as validation sometimes. Naomi likely still has moments where she struggles with the urge to overgive. Zahra might still catch herself wanting to suppress an emotion.
Of course. They're human. But the difference now is profound. Now they notice. They catch themselves sooner. They can pause. They can breathe. They can consciously choose differently in the moment. Sovereignty isn't about achieving some state of perpetual flawlessness. It's much more about a daily conscious choice to trust the body's intelligence over the mind's deeply grooved old survival strategies.
And it's that daily practice of noticing, of choosing differently, that actually cultivates real security. Security that's cultivated through presence, not earned through performance. Which brings us back to that core question, the one we hope really sits with you, the listener, long after this deep dive finishes. Where are you still performing strength because softening feels unsafe?
The strength these women developed, the strength maybe you developed, it was absolutely necessary. We have to honor that. It was the bridge that got them, and maybe you here. It ensured literal survival, professional success, family stability. But the strength itself was never meant to be the final destination. The moment you stop blaming your surroundings, your job, your family, the world, for your exhaustion, or your silence, or your rigidity, that's the moment you begin the really powerful work of reclaiming your full self, your full voice. The deeper truth, the one underpinning this whole framework, is that sovereignty is ultimately about trusting the intelligence held within your own body and accepting that softness, allowing vulnerability, receiving support, expressing truth gently, isn't merely permissible or some kind of secondary nice to have. It is, in fact, the deepest, most resilient, and ultimately the most sustainable form of strength we actually possess.
If this discussion has resonated deeply with you today, and perhaps you feel ready to start mapping your own journey along these 6 levels, we want to share the pathways that were suggested in the written piece for continuing this personal exploration. First, we really encourage you to explore the free guide and meditation that's mentioned. It's called Where Are You on the 6 Levels of the Pathway to Sovereignty? This tool is specifically designed to help you listen to your body and notice which territory, survival, stability, self-awareness, integrity, wholeness, or freedom you might be inhabiting most strongly right now, without any judgment, just noticing.
Yeah, that guide offers some really good reflective questions. They encourage deep honesty with yourself. Prompts like, what am I actively protecting by staying strong in this particular way right now? Or, what would ease actually feel like in my body if I stopped trying so hard to earn it? And these aren't questions looking for quick, easy answers. They're more about creating that necessary internal space, that quiet for your body's own wisdom to surface in its own time.
Secondly, if the idea of acknowledgement or the reading of that letter to a woman I tried to keep small really stirred something specific and profound within you, we invite you to listen to it again. The article suggests that having these often unnamed systemic patterns voiced externally can offer a really profound opportunity for internal healing and integration.
And finally, the article mentions a powerful resource for emotional embodiment and release. It's a journal called Your Path to Receiving What They Might Never Say. This is designed specifically to help you release what your nervous system might still be holding on to from past experiences, allowing you to name the unmet needs, perhaps grieve what was never acknowledged by others. It's really a practice of fully witnessing yourself in your complete, non-performing humanity.
Because the ultimate work of sovereignty, it seems, is about remembering who you have always been underneath all the layers of performance and protection. It's about trusting your body's innate knowing.
It's about choosing, again and again, to gently unlearn the reflexes that once protected you, but now might be constricting you.